On the cold and windy night of March 1st, 1932, the world changed forever within the secluded woodlands of the Sourland Mountains in New Jersey. The sprawling estate known as Highfields was intended to be a sanctuary for the most famous man on earth, but instead it became the stage for a tragedy that would haunt the American consciousness for a century. Charles Lindbergh was the golden boy of aviation and the first man to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, making him an international hero and a symbol of American ingenuity. However, fame brought with it a dangerous kind of attention that forced the Lindbergh family to seek refuge in this remote location. Little did they know that the darkness surrounding their new home concealed a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike at the heart of their happiness. The wind howled through the leafless trees surrounding the stone mansion as Charles Lindbergh sat in his library on that fateful Tuesday evening. His wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh, was also home along with the household staff, who were going about their evening routines. Upstairs in the nursery lay their 20-month-old son, Charles Lindbergh Jr., who was suffering from a mild cold. The nursemaid Betty Gow had put the child to bed around 8 o'clock, ensuring he was warm and secure in his crib. The atmosphere was calm and domestic, a sharp contrast to the chaos that was about to erupt. It was a night like any other, until a strange noise was heard by the colonel, a sound like the cracking of wood, which he dismissed as a falling crate in the kitchen. At approximately 10 o'clock, Betty Gow returned to the nursery to check on the baby and discovered an empty crib where the toddler should have been sleeping. Confusion quickly turned to panic as she searched the room and then ran to inform the parents that the child was missing. Charles Lindbergh rushed to the room and found the window open and the shutters unlatched. On the window sill lay a white envelope that would become one of the most analyzed pieces of evidence in criminal history. The nursery was otherwise undisturbed, but the absence of the child sucked the air out of the room. The realization hit Charles with the force of a physical blow as he turned to his wife and uttered the chilling words, "And they have stolen our baby." The local police in Hopewell were notified immediately, and the news spread across the wires with lightning speed. By the next morning, the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby was the top headline in every newspaper from New York to San Francisco. The Hunterdon County quiet countryside was suddenly invaded by an army of reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers who trampled over the crime scene and destroyed potential evidence in their frenzy. The investigation began under the command of Colonel Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., the head of the New Jersey State Police. Despite his best efforts, the crime scene was compromised almost instantly by the sheer volume of people descending upon the estate. This chaotic beginning would plague the investigation for years to come. Investigators discovered crude but vital clues left behind by the kidnappers in the mud and the bushes outside the house. A ladder was found roughly 60 feet from the house, broken, where two sections were joined together, which explained the cracking sound Lindbergh had heard earlier. The ladder was a homemade contraption, poorly constructed, yet functional enough to reach the second-story window. Alongside the ladder, police found a chisel and footprints that were difficult to cast due to the soft ground. These items suggested a perpetrator who was prepared, but perhaps not a professional criminal. The ladder itself became a focal point of the inquiry, as wood experts began to analyze its grain and construction methods in hopes of tracing it back to a specific lumberyard or carpenter. The ransom note found on the windowsill was written in disjointed English with peculiar misspellings and grammar that suggested a writer of German origin. It demanded $50,000 for the safe return of the child and warned the family not to involve the police. The note also featured a unique signature symbol composed of two interlocking blue circles and a red circle with 3 holes punched through them. This symbol was intended to authenticate future correspondence from the kidnappers. The desperate parents were willing to pay any price and begged the kidnappers to communicate with them. The public outpouring of sympathy was immense, but it also brought out frauds and opportunists looking to capitalize on the tragedy. As days turned into weeks, the investigation seemed to stall with no credible leads on the whereabouts of the baby. The Lindberghs authorized the release of a statement promising not to prosecute the kidnappers if the child was returned safely. Several intermediaries stepped forward claiming to have contact with the abductors. One such figure was a retired school teacher from the Bronx named Dr. John F. Condon. Condon had placed an advertisement in a local newspaper offering to act as a go-between, and surprisingly, he received a reply from the kidnappers. This development shifted the focus of the investigation to New York City, where Condon began a series of secret meetings with a man who called himself John. Dr. Condon met with the mysterious John in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx under the cover of darkness. The man had a thick accent and obscured his face, but he provided Condon with the sleeping suit of the toddler as proof of identity. The Lindberghs confirmed the sleeping suit belonged to their son, which raised their hopes that the kidnappers still held the child alive. Negotiations for the ransom payment proceeded, and the demand was raised to $70,000. The police and the FBI monitored these events from a distance, trying to balance the safety of the child with the need to capture the criminals. The tension was unbearable as the date for the exchange approached. On April 2, 1932, the ransom money was delivered by Dr. Condon to the man named John at St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx. Charles Lindbergh waited in a nearby car with the gold certificates that had been carefully recorded by the authorities. The money was handed over in a wooden box, and in return, Condon received a note claiming the child could be found on a boat named the Nellie near Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. Lindbergh immediately took to the air, searching the waters for days, but the boat was never found. It became agonizingly clear that the information was a lie, and the kidnappers had vanished with the money leaving the family in a state of devastating limbo. The tragic conclusion to the search came on May 12, 1932, just a few miles from the Lindbergh estate. A truck driver named William Allen stopped his vehicle on a road near Mount Road to relieve himself in the woods. There, in a shallow depression among the underbrush, he discovered the decomposing body of a toddler. The body was identified as Charles Lindbergh Jr. by the overlapping toes on his right foot and the shirt that Betty Gow had sewn for him. An autopsy revealed that the child had died from a massive skull fracture, likely on the night of the kidnapping. The hope that had sustained the nation for 2 months was extinguished in an instant, replaced by a collective desire for vengeance. The discovery of the body changed the investigation from a kidnapping case to a hunt for a murderer. The ransom money became the primary tool for tracking down the killer, as the serial numbers of the gold certificates had been distributed to banks and businesses across the country. However, the Great Depression was in full swing, and gold certificates were being recalled by the government, which complicated the tracking process. For 2 years, the trail went cold, with only sporadic reports of the bills surfacing in the New York area. The police created a massive map, pinning the locations where the money appeared, hoping to find a pattern that would lead them to the suspect. It was not until September 1934 that the breakthrough finally arrived, thanks to an observant gas station attendant in Manhattan. A man driving a blue Dodge sedan pulled into the station to purchase gasoline and paid with a $10 gold certificate. Suspicious of the bill and the driver, the attendant wrote the license plate number of the car on the margin of the certificate. When the bank confirmed the bill was part of the Lindbergh ransom, the police traced the license plate to a carpenter living in the Bronx named Bruno Richard Hauptmann. This single slip-up by the suspect unraveled the mystery that had baffled the authorities for over 2 years. Bruno Richard Hauptmann was a German immigrant and a carpenter who lived with his wife and young son in a quiet neighborhood. When police arrested him, they found a $20 gold certificate from the ransom in his pocket. A subsequent search of his home and garage revealed over $14,000 of the ransom money hidden in oil cans and hollowed-out spaces in the walls. Hauptmann claimed he was holding the money for a friend and business partner named Isidor Fisch, who had returned to Germany and died there. This defense, which became known as the Fisch story, was viewed with extreme skepticism by the investigators and the public alike. The evidence against Hauptmann began to mount as forensic science played a crucial role for the first time in a major trial. A wood expert named Arthur Kohler traced the wood used in the kidnapping ladder to the attic of the Hauptmann home. Kohler demonstrated that a rail from the ladder matched a missing floorboard in the attic perfectly, including the nail holes and the grain patterns. This forensic link was damning, as it directly connected the tool of the crime to the residence of the suspect. Additionally, handwriting experts testified that the ransom notes were written by Hauptmann, citing numerous similarities in letter formation and spelling errors. The trial of Bruno Richard Hauptmann began in January 1935 in the small town of Flemington, New Jersey. It was dubbed the trial of the century and attracted a media circus that rivaled the initial kidnapping coverage. The courthouse was packed daily with spectators, celebrities, and reporters from around the globe. Outside vendors sold souvenirs and miniature ladders, while crowds chanted for justice. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution, led by David Wylance, painted a picture of Hauptmann as a cold-blooded monster who kidnapped and killed the child for greed. Lindbergh himself took the stand, testifying that the voice he heard in the cemetery shouting, "Hey, doctor," was that of Hauptmann. Hauptmann took the stand in his own defense, vehemently denying any involvement in the crime. He stuck to his story about Isidor Fisch and claimed that he was being framed by the police, who were desperate to close the case. His demeanor was often described as arrogant or indifferent, which did not endear him to the jury. The defense team tried to poke holes in the circumstantial evidence, arguing that no one had seen Hauptmann at the crime scene and that the latter evidence was fabricated. However, the weight of the ransom money found in his possession was an obstacle that the defense could not overcome. The public sentiment was overwhelmingly against him, fueled by the sensationalist press. The jury deliberated for 11 hours before returning a verdict of guilty of murder in the first degree. The sentence was death. Hauptmann received the news with a stone face, maintaining his innocence even as he was led away to death row. The verdict was celebrated in the streets of Flemington and across the nation as a victory for justice. Appeals were filed immediately, but the legal system moved forward with the execution process. The case had exhausted the American public emotionally, and the verdict provided a sense of closure that many desperate people needed during the hard times of the Depression. While on death row, Hauptmann was offered a large sum of money by a newspaper to confess to the crime, ensuring financial security for his wife and son. He refused the offer, steadfastly maintaining that he would not admit to a crime he did not commit. This refusal has fueled debates among historians and true crime enthusiasts for decades. Some argue that a guilty man would have taken the money to provide for his family, while others believe his pride or delusion prevented him from confessing. Governor Harold Hoffman of New Jersey secretly visited Hauptmann in prison, expressing doubts about the verdict, but he was unable to halt the execution. On April 3, 1936, Bruno Richard Hauptmann was executed in the electric chair at the New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. His final words were reported to be a claim of innocence. With the flip of a switch, the life of the man convicted of the crime of the century was ended, but the questions surrounding the case did not die with him. The execution satisfied the legal requirements of the state, but it left a lingering shadow over the history of American justice. Was Hauptmann a lone wolf, or was he part of a larger conspiracy that was never uncovered due to the rush to judgment? The aftermath of the Lindbergh kidnapping had profound effects on American law and society. Congress passed the Federal Kidnapping Act, commonly known as the Lindbergh Law, which made kidnapping a federal offense if the victim was transported across state lines. This allowed the FBI to have immediate jurisdiction in such cases, significantly expanding the power of federal law enforcement. The tragedy also led to a decline in the immense celebrity worship that had surrounded figures like Lindbergh, as the public realized the terrible cost that fame could exact on a private life. The Lindbergh family eventually moved to Europe to escape the constant scrutiny and painful memories. Despite the execution of Hauptmann, theories about the crime continued to circulate. Some investigators believe that Hauptmann could not have acted alone, citing the difficulty of managing the ladder and the child simultaneously. Others pointed to the lack of fingerprints in the nursery and the insider knowledge required to know which window to access. Speculation arose about the involvement of household staff or even family members, though no credible evidence ever supported these claims. The idea of a mastermind behind the plot remains a popular topic in books and documentaries that re-examine the case files. One of the most persistent mysteries involves the identity of the man named John, whom Dr. Condon met in the cemeteries. While the prosecution insisted it was Hauptmann, discrepancies in the descriptions given by Condon and other witnesses have led some to believe an accomplice existed. Sketches made at the time show a face that resembles Hauptmann, but also bears similarities to other known criminals of the era. The possibility that the mastermind walked free while the carpenter took the fall is a chilling thought that adds another layer of tragedy to the narrative. The silence of the grave keeps these secrets well hidden. The role of the press in the Lindbergh case also established a precedent for how high-profile crimes are covered in the media. The intrusive nature of the reporters and the sensationalism of the trial turned the tragedy into a spectacle that blurred the lines between news and entertainment. Cameras were allowed in the courtroom for part of the trial, creating a chaotic environment that many legal scholars believe prejudiced the jury. This led to the implementation of Canon 35 by the American Bar Association, which recommended banning cameras from courtrooms, a rule that stood for decades. The physical evidence from the case is still preserved in the archives of the New Jersey State Police Museum. The infamous ladder, the ransom notes, and the sleeping suit are kept as macabre relics of a bygone era. Visitors to the museum can see the wood grain analysis that convicted Hauptmann and the handwriting samples that were used to seal his fate. These artifacts serve as a tangible connection to the past, allowing new generations to witness the tools of a crime that defined a generation. They stand as silent witnesses to the suffering of a child and the destruction of two families. Charles and Anne Lindbergh went on to have 5 more children, but the loss of their firstborn remained a scar that never fully healed. They lived out their lives carrying the weight of the tragedy, often retreating into privacy to avoid the prying eyes of the world. Anne Morrow Lindbergh became an acclaimed author in her own right, using her writing to process her grief and explore the human condition. The kidnapping created a rift in their lives that divided their history into before and after. Their resilience in the face of such horror is a testament to their strength, but the sorrow was always present just beneath the surface. In recent years, modern forensic techniques have been applied to the evidence in attempts to definitively prove or disprove the guilt of Hauptmann. handwriting analysis software, and wood science have generally supported the original findings of the prosecution. However, the lack of DNA evidence from the ransom stamps or the envelope leaves a margin for error that keeps the debate alive. True crime researchers continue to dig through the thousands of pages of FBI files, looking for overlooked clues or contradictions. The case remains an open wound in the psyche of the American justice system. The Lindbergh Kidnapping serves as a grim reminder of the vulnerability of innocence. It shattered the illusion of safety for millions of American families who realized that if the most famous child in the world could be taken from his crib, then no one was truly safe. It marked the end of a certain kind of innocence in the country, coinciding with the darkest days of the Great Depression. The story is not just about a crime, it is about the loss of hope and the desperate need for answers in a chaotic world. The legacy of the case is also tied to the xenophobia and anti-German sentiment that was present in the 1930s. Hauptmann, an illegal immigrant with a criminal record in Germany, was an easy target for a public looking for a villain. While the evidence against him was substantial, some historians argue that his nationality played a significant role in the speed and ferocity of his conviction. The trial occurred in the shadow of the rising Nazi power in Europe, adding a geopolitical undertone to the domestic tragedy. This context is essential for understanding the atmosphere in which justice was administered. As we look back on the crime of the century, nearly 100 years later, we are left with a mix of certainty and doubt. The official record states that Bruno Richard Hauptmann acted alone and paid the ultimate price. Yet the unanswered questions about accomplices, the missing money, and the chaotic investigation ensure that the case will never be fully closed in the court of public opinion. It remains a complex puzzle of human greed, sorrow, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Ultimately, the Lindbergh Kidnapping is a story about a little boy who never had the chance to grow up. Charles Lindbergh Jr. is often overshadowed by the fame of his father and the drama of the trial, but he is the central figure of this tragedy. His brief life and violent death changed laws, transformed media, and captivated the world. We remember him not just as a victim, but as a symbol of a time when the world realized that even heroes could bleed. The empty crib in the nursery at Highfields remains a haunting image of loss that time cannot erase.